At the outset, we are very grateful to Professor Manindra Thakur for agreeing to give this lecture and spend with us this time despite his extremely busy schedule. So without further ado, let me introduce today's speaker to you. Professor Manindra Thakur teaches at the Center for Political Studies at the Jawaharlal Nehru University, JNU, New Delhi. He was a fellow of innovative research at the Developing Countries Research Center and a fellow at the Nehru Museum and Library as well. He is one of the Foundation for Creative Social Research Trustees, which organizes an annual conference on creative theory. His books include Wounded History, Religion, Psyche, and Social Healing, as well as Democracy on the Move, Moments and Movements. He's currently working on a manuscript on religion and marxism, as well as Gandhi's ethical realism. Without further ado, we thank you, sir, for agreeing to give this lecture and look forward very much to your lecture.
Am I audible now?
Yes, sir, you are.
Yes, okay. Thank you very much, Pushi, for making me part of this wonderful course. I have been getting feedback from a couple of my friends who are involved in the course. Let me begin by suggesting that what I'm going to do is based on my own experience in research, in ethnographic research, and I'm trying to theorize that experience. Of course, I'm not the only one who is doing it. It has a tradition, but I think me and my friends who are part of this group are trying to evolve certain different modes of doing this research, particularly in the country like India, which is very complex. The first point I want to make is about the nature of social science today. Very briefly, I want to mention that social science, if it wants to survive, will have to innovate itself. That's something that is very provocative, I know, but I believe social science is passing through a deep crisis, and we need to reimagine social science from the point of view of its transformative capacity. In short, I would like to say that if social science is not transformative, there will be a problem for the discipline as such. What is this sound in between? Is it the people who are entering?
Yes, it is people who are entering. I'll request
Can we
to kindly mute that. Yeah. Please mute the sound while admitting people if possible. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think this reimagination of social science requires to acknowledge the transformative potential of this knowledge. If the knowledge of social science is not transformative, then we will not be able to sustain this endeavor of knowing our society. I'm not suggesting that knowing in itself is not important. I'm only suggesting that this transformative knowledge will be useful for people, and therefore we have to think of socially useful social science. In fact, I would suggest that people like Gandhi and Marx and Ambedkar, they could be read as exponents of this transformative social science. We have read Gandhi and Ambedkar mostly as political leaders or at best as political philosophers, but we have never treated them as social scientists. But if you look at their work, you can easily realize that the challenge before them was to transform our society, and for that they developed certain method of knowing society. Imagine Gandhi coming from South Africa and taking a tour of the country, entire country. He traveled to understand Indian reality. He acknowledged that's the kind of ethnographic study of Indian society that he conducted. Similarly,
Asha,
so there cannot be two lectures simultaneously. Isha,
Yes.
I guess.
So, extremely sorry. I'm not sure how this
I
person
think
got unmuted. I'm very, very sorry. I'm just trying to mute that person. I'm.
Should we wait for 5-10 minutes
No,
to
no,
let
please,
people
just a
enter?
minute. Could we please mute Miss Isha, please? I don't know how she was unmuted.
Thank you. Sorry, I just.
Very sorry, sir. Please.
So I was suggesting that if we treat these thinkers as social scientists or humans, experts in human sciences. For instance, Gandhi was suggested that you must understand human nature, and he read a good number of books to understand that. But more than that, he traveled around, interacted with large number of people, make notes on people's behavior, and developed an understanding of Indian society. And that understanding was aiming at transforming society. Same would be true about Ambedkar. Constantly, he was engaging, reflecting, thinking, writing, and these were mostly ethnographic studies. I mean, I would like to put them as ethnographic studies. And in this, what happened was the researcher, if we treat them as researcher, the researcher and the field, they got merged. The researcher got involved in the process of research and then in the process of transforming the reality about which the researcher was researching or working. This is what I guess Marx called praxis. The theory and practice combine, strengthening each other constantly. And we have so many examples of this kind. This is not only one. In recent times, we have heard of Medha Patikar, who went there for her PhD, then got involved in the movement, and her knowledge of the reason helped her in organizing the movement and transforming the reality of that area. So what happens in this process? I think in this process, and that is what we have to abstract from this idea that I'm talking about. That is, there is a relationship between our being, our thinking, and knowing. This being, thinking, and knowing relationship is most crucial for researcher. Normally what happens, we think knowing is something existing outside, and we differentiate between our being and knowing, and we hardly think about our being, and we never connect. The thing that connects our being and knowing is the thinking. If thinking is something not about the being, then we can never connect that with the knowing. I think that is what is crucial to understand. One can read Avijit Pathak's writings. Avijit Pathak is a JNU sociologist. His writings about modernity, his writings about life, he combines all these things together. So our knowing is dependent on our thinking about our being. And since our being is not only an isolated individual's being, but socially embedded being, therefore, I would, when I'm saying that I'm thinking about my being, I'm thinking only about my individuality. I'm thinking about me, of course, but my me is deeply rooted in society. So I'm a miniature form of society. So if I'm thinking about my being, then I'm also generating the knowledge about my own society. That's a constant process. I will come back to this point later on when I'll talk about autobiographies or autoethnographies as part of our research technique. Many of the autobiographies, like Murdaiya, written by a professor from JNU once again, these are the text in social sciences. This text is very much about the Dalit life in a village, and it explains things which otherwise social research fails to explain. So I'll come to that point. But I want to emphasize on this point that as a researcher, we need to understand that even if we are choosing a field, the field is not our other. The field is something where we locate. The choice of the field itself depends on our being. Choice of the research subject depends on our being. If that is not true, if that doesn't happen, then this disjunction takes place. I'm not suggesting that we do grandmother's research. We do research only on things which are close to us. I'm not suggesting that, but I'm suggesting that there are reasons for why we choose certain subjects to work on. And if you go deeper into our own consciousness, you will realize that researcher encounters certain issues as a researcher, and therefore at some stage the researcher wants to go back to those issues. And that is how we select our subjects. I mean, I can talk about me definitely. My first work was on religion and class, and this was a time when we were in conflict, that whether we were all becoming Marxists at the time as young scholars, but religion was also influencing us deeply. So we were confused. So many of us started working on that theme. And it influenced our life. The knowledge that we generated about liberation theology in Nicaragua or certain kind of movements in India and engagement between religion and class was not isolated knowledge from us. It was not knowledge created for outside. It influenced our life perfectly well. So this combination of knowledge with thinking and being, I think, is one thing that as a researcher, we must take cognizance of. Whether we are conscious of it or not, it does exist. It's entirely possible that we are not conscious of it, but this is what happens with us. And if we do it consciously, then probably we connect them properly. If we don't do it consciously, then gradually the disjunction appears, and then we fail to really, connect the knowledge with social reality. So the transformative politics, the transformative social science requires a cognizance of requires cognizance of this process of being, thinking, and knowing. I'll stop it here. Then I'll move on to the relation between individual and the researcher and the field. And this is where I will talk of my own experiences of the project that I've mentioned in the abstract. The project is called Mapping Knowledge and Practice in India. And what happened when we undertook this project, and why did we undertake this project? What are the methods we have adopted in this project? What we think is a methodological contribution of the project. I'll talk about that. So as a researcher, when we select a topic to research, as I said, it comes from our experiential knowledge of certain things or the questions that we face at certain stage. And I would say it should also come from there. It should also come from, we must, as a social scientist, do certain kind of problem solving. The problems that we have faced in our life, the problem that people are facing in their life. So problem, not necessarily that this is a problem absolutely connected with me as an individual, but it's entirely possible that the problem is somewhere where I'm also located. If not physically, mentally, I'm located in that context. So from there, we extract these problems and start solving the problems. So the researcher, consciously or subconsciously or unconsciously, is always connected with the field. I think there were phases in ethnography when we thought that our purpose is to produce very objective knowledge. So the writing style of ours, ethnographic writing style of ours, also used to be in third person. That researcher goes there and researcher finds this. I think those times are gone. We write that, yes, I went there, I discovered this. I think we have moved to the next stage now, where this I is not I is not an isolated I is not a neutral I. The I is also embedded and involved I. There's a purpose of I trying to explore certain knowledge. The purpose is that we help the community to transform, and also there is a cognitive process of the I. In that cognitive process, the research has deep impact. So research for me, and I guess it is for everybody, is not a one-time project. It's a lifelong project. There are stages of research. We may take up a research and finish the project, submit the report, but I'm sure the project remains with us all the time to come, as these are the projects which are connected with our being. So a researcher, when he goes to the field, he or she goes to the field and engages with people, simultaneously two things happen. One, that people on whom we are researching, or the reason on where we are researching, they also become conscious of themselves. They also start reflecting on themselves, and we simultaneously reflect on ourselves. And I remember one of my field works when I went to Punjab. We were doing a project on conflict and institutional change in Punjab, and it was very difficult to crack, in the sense that nobody was ready to talk about anything, because it just after the violence, it was around 2002 or so. The villagers were very suspicious of anybody coming from outside and talking about Punjab crisis. So finally, one of my friends who was from Haryana, he said that let's have a dinner together once. And during the dinner, we had nice liquor that was offered by the people with whom we were sitting. And then they started talking about the issues. They opened up their heart. And that opening up a heart, for 3 hours we discussed. It was like a Truth and Reconciliation Commission of South Africa, where the researcher was also constantly transforming. And of course, somebody who was narrating what happened and shedding tears, constantly crying that what happened there. It was a very emotional moment. So for a researcher, remaining neutral in that emotional moment and claiming that one is not influencing, emotion is not influencing our knowledge, would be unjust. I think this is what happens when we go to the field. This is not one moment. I can mention so many moments of such time. A group of researchers with me went to Kashmir during the same time on the same project. And we had a very long discussion with a Sufi saint about the militancy in Kashmir, almost 3-4 hours. And people who were sitting with us, who took us to the Sufi Saint, they were also crying most of the time. And he was explaining how people were killed and what happened. So I think when we go to the field and we engage with people there, we are not engaging with numbers. Like so many data we have to collect, so many people we have to do deep interviews. I think the subjective objective dichotomy merges there. The field and researcher both merge there. So this relationship, and this is a cognitive relation, this is a transformative relationship, both for the researcher and for the field. I'm not saying this is transformative in the sense that it transforms both of us fundamentally, but I'm sure that in some amount, both of us are transformed. To some extent, we start looking at the same problem little differently. People who were sitting with us, we met after a month to them, and they started talking about things very differently. So when we go as a researcher to the field, as ethnographer, and we get involved in research, we are talking to the human beings. And human beings with totalized ontology, not isolated, not individual, just talking about the subject that we are mentioning, but even in order to enter into their subconscious or in their consciousness, we need to engage with them as human beings. We have to, as I gave the Punjab experience, only when we started treating them as friends, we were able to get what we wanted to get from them, not before that. So cracking the field, I think, requires this kind of engagement. I can give another example which was given to me by a professor from Labour Institute who was doing a project in a village on child labor and bonded labor. And he sent a team there. Team stayed there for a month, wrote back to him that people are not speaking out. We know that bonded labor is there or child labor is there, but people are not speaking out. We can't theorize it. We can't get any information or data. This professor went to that place himself, and on the station, he asked somebody, that the coolie, that he wants to go to this address. The coolie said that I can take you to that place. But this fellow, yes, he said, yes, you please take me to that place. I'll give you money, but I will carry my luggage myself. And he took the box on his head, the suitcase on his head, and he walked through the village. So everybody was surprised. Who was he? Well-dressed professor walking with suitcase on his head. So they were curious. They started, and he was not, he went there, did not stay with the team, stayed outside and started engaging with the villagers. He would crack that boundary and could then negotiate with them. And within 2 days, he started getting the data. And then he called the team and started conducting the research. What I'm suggesting is, ethnographic research, when we do that, the relation between the self and the field is a complex relationship. It's a very complex relationship. If we are doing economic research, probably we are more interested in data. But if you are doing political research, where merely data does not tell us anything, in fact, that is why psephologists really fail. But they go there and ask them about their opinion. Who the hell is going to give you one's opinion so easily? It's very difficult. So ethnographic research is specific in its nature, because it takes the researcher to the level of the field, and the field and researcher engage in a complex relationship. I mean, I can give you an example of my field work during the elections, where my idea was not to study election, but the idea was to capture the inner world of political life in that constituency. What are the issues on which people get mobilized? How do people think about politics? Let me share in 1 minute. This was a very complex constituency, a reserve constituency, where one person was winning since last 5 times with good margin. And there was a candidate, independent, middle-aged woman, having no money and no caste support. Her caste population was around 2,000. And she won the election by 25,000 votes. Bihar election 2015. And we could see that she was winning. It was very difficult for any psephologist to see that she was winning. What was the reason behind that? I think the reason behind that was the idea of justice that was prevalent in people there. There was an idea of justice in the consciousness of in the collective consciousness of the region. This lady was given a ticket by a political party. Of course, she used to be socially active, but no, not so active that she would win independently. She was given ticket by a political party, but the ticket was withdrawn a day before the election. And that news is spread in the constituency. And wherever we went, everybody told us that this is injustice. The best discussion that we had was in the Kalali. Kalali, you understand, where the desi liquor is sold. So we spent 2 hours there, and there people were really speaking their heart, and everybody was saying the only thing, that ye to anyay hai, ye to nyay nahi hai. So I think this is possible to enter into the inner world of the field while doing ethnography, if we merge ourselves with the field. And what are the ways of merging oneself? I mentioned 3 examples, but there could be many more, and I'm sure more people have more experiences. Let me come to the project that I was talking about, and through that I will talk about some innovations that we are trying to do in field research. And please remind me 5 minutes before my time is getting over.
Sure.
Yeah, Pushya?
Sure, sir, I'll do that.
Yeah. So this project is called Mapping Knowledge and Practice in India. The central question that we have raised is that whether the traditional philosophies that flourished in different regions have any impact on the people of those regions. Means, are these traditional philosophies still existing in the collective consciousness of the region? And if it does, how does it interact with, how do these philosophies interact with the modernity? And does this interaction produce any kind of conflict in the minds of those people? And if there is some kind of conflict, how do people resolve those conflicts? And finally, as a political scientist, my question was, does this have any impact on, or in different regions, such kind of interaction, does that influence their political behavior or their everyday life, everyday behavior? I think this was something that we were working on. We started long back and did a pre-pilot project with Heidelberg University. And our first field was something that might interest you. The the villages where Nyaya philosophy flourished for almost 1,000 years. These are the villages, around 5 to 10 villages, where most of the famous Nyayiks that you have been thinking of or reading of, they were born and they did their work there on those villages, in those villages. So we wanted to go to those villages and try to see that mostly our friends in Delhi were thinking that India has become modern and those philosophies are now archival materials and they have no impact on our everyday life. They are not living philosophies anymore. So I called that a pre-pilot project because we were not sure how to map collective consciousness, how to engage, how to really cull out things from field to prove the point that something is existing in the collective consciousness. So we had no method. We had no project proposal in a way. We just went to the field, had a kind of, I call it philosophical journey. Just in kind of decided a route and traveled on the route, stayed in the villages, interacted with people, late night interactions, sitting on the dhaba and then the chaurahas or those small tea huts, talking to the people. 4 of us were there. One was a German scholar, Evelyn Hust. There was another English professor, and there was another person who was working for the German organization. When we came back, I'm not sure if we could really discover much, except that we thought that our hypothesis seems to be sustainable, and we need to, at least the project seems to be viable, and we need to expand it further. But the German lady wrote a long essay about the field, a report. That report is worth reading. I mean, I also say what she says, that that journey, that philosophical journey, transformed her life. She did not continue with the field. She is now working with the Goethe Institute in Germany. But whoever came from Germany, who knew her, she or he definitely knew also about the project. She keeps talking about the project even now. So that was our first experience, where we argued that the researcher and the field both get transformed in that. The field also got transformed because our going there initiated a lot of interest in people. The people of that region were not very conscious of the fact that they were host of such a big philosophical tradition. Very few people were aware of that. Most of the people either did not know about Nyaya, or broadly speaking, some idea, well, something happened here, that's it. But our intervention, our going there and meeting a lot of people, in fact, prepared at least a team, a group, which kept calling us that what is your next step? What are you going to do now? After 12 years, we launched this project once again in JNU. JNU funded us a bit of money, and 4 people from different disciplines got involved. But let me continue with this Mithila project, what happened there then. So we got a request from the field that we want to organize a program, 2-day conference in a village, 2-day conference on Nyaya philosophy in a village. This village is the village of famous philosopher called Ayachi Mishra. Ayachi was a great Nayayik. His son Shankar Mishra wrote around 25 volumes on Nyaya, which was basically Ayachi's ideas. Ayachi was in 1400 something, used to run a school in the village, and a lot of famous Nayayiks have come out from that school. So we agreed to go for that, the conference, 2 days major conference was organized, and local NIAIs were invited, and also professors and other people were invited. But another interesting thing happened. They discovered a story of 14th century of Ayachi Mishra. The story was that when Ayachi had a son, the lady who helped in the birth of the son, in local language, she's a scheduled caste lady called Chamain. It's a local colloquial word. He had nothing to offer to this lady, so he told her that whatever this boy will earn, his first earning will go to you. And the first earning, fortunately, was that the king, local king, was passing through the village. He asked this boy, "Who are you?" And this boy read out a Sanskrit slok. And the king got very impressed. And he gave his Nolakha har to the boy. This is the story in the village. And the boy went to his father and said that this is what I have got. This is my first earning. And the father said that this belongs to this lady. So lady was invited and she was offered that. And the lady said that, "What will I do with this? I can't keep it. I can't wear it. I can't do anything with this. So please don't give it to me." So they said, "No, no, this is yours. You decide what to do." And she took it, sold it, and she used the money to dig a big pond for supplying water to common people there. So this is the story there. And this story reached to the Chief Minister of Bihar, and he got interested in this project. And he said that I want to come to the village to inaugurate the conference. So he came to the village to inaugurate the conference, and then a lot of things happened. So I'm just mentioning how this research project may transform the field and the researcher, both of them. And then we continued. We had another seminar. Now we have a group, WhatsApp group formed around 200 people are members of that, 100 or 200 people are members of that. And they are now trying to kind of revive that tradition. Gradually, this group started something called Madhubani Literary Festival. The idea was in this literary festival to invite people from villages and from outside world who have been working on the intellectual tradition of this region, which includes not only Nyaya, which includes other philosophies, Tantra and other things also, and musical traditions, art traditions, painting, so many things. And this is the fourth or fifth year of that festival going on. So this is one story of how it's happening. And of course, we are producing writings on that. We are working on, I'm trying to work on biography of this village. Sarsab Pahi, this village is called Sarsab Pahi, which is a host of many great intellectuals in the modern times also. But it is interesting to see how the village conceives itself and how the collective consciousness of village. This is a village also of a famous scholar called Allahabad Vice Chancellor and Professor Jha, Ganganath, Mahamopadhyay Ganganath Jha. This is a village of him also. This is a village of so many professors in sociology and political science and other disciplines. So I'm trying to do a biography of this village. There's another example. There's another village that we have picked up. That is in Mayong. That is in Guwahati. Now, how did I pick up this village? How did I pick up this idea of going to Nyaya region first and then to Mayong? Let me also explain that a bit. The Nyaya region attracted me because I discovered that a lot of argumentative techniques that I'm using, and a Sanskrit friend of mine told me that these techniques sound like you know about Nyaya. I told him I have no idea what is Nyaya. He said, no, you must have some idea because you belong to that region. I said, but I have no idea. Then I started discovering, and I discovered that actually this reason is a Nyaya philosophy reason. And there were many arguments which I was trying to put forward. The structure of the argument were similar to the Nyaya philosophical argumentative techniques. Like I asked Professor Sudipto Kaviraj that, do you think this hypothesis is sustainable? He said that of late, when he is working in Colombia and working this Sanskrit project, they have started telling him that his technique of argumentation is closer to Nyaya technique. And then he discovered that he belongs to Navadvip area, which was actually Navanyaya region, where the Naiyayiks from Mithila went after the conflict between Buddhism and Naiyayiks. They went to this Navadvip area. Amartya Sen's argumentative India is also product of a similar collective consciousness, and Kaviraj also belongs to the same. So it is in a way self-discovery. I'm trying to discover myself, how my consciousness is constituted by the collective consciousness. And that is a kind of research that influences both me and the field. Similar to the Tantra, this Mayong thing, let me narrate the story. I hope I have 10 minutes or 12 minutes time.
Absolutely, sir. Please.
Yeah. So, you know that these books, J.K. Rowling's books, were becoming very popular, and I had a young son who was reading those books and telling me the stories of that. And I had a feeling that I was more or less aware of these stories. So I told him that this story sounds very familiar to me. He said, "Oh, how come you may not be knowing these stories, but they are actually new, and these books are new." But then a name that struck to my mind was Mayang. And I called my students in the campus on a cup of tea and asked them, "Have you heard of any village called Mayang?" These are the students from Assam. And they said, "Yes, there is a village called Mayang, which is actually Jadu Nagari, which is basically known for its tantric tradition." And that took me to Assam. And I discovered that my village is located on a route from Gorakhpur to Kamakhya. And I have collected several stories from my village and neighboring villages about these Gorakhpanthis and their karnamas. There are many local sayings, local stories, their influence on people's life. So I've collected some of the stories. And most of them were going from there to Mayang. Mayang also is the place where Machindra Nath was lost. If you have heard about that famous statement, Jag Machindra Gorakh Aya. So Machindra went to Mayang and he forgot about himself, and he had a family, 2 children, and Gorakhnath was looking for him. So he reached there and then discovered that Machindra was there. So he started singing this song, and that's how Machindra Nath became conscious, and then realized that he was under the influence, under the spell of some kind of magic. He lost his consciousness. So this is a village. This is a famous village. I then went to Guwahati and started engaging with people, trying to find out the village. A friend of mine who was a police officer there, he told me that, "Why do you want to go there?" When I was an ADC to governor, I used to go to the village because the governor was interested in that village. He used to get a lot of text from there. And we were very angry that why this governor is unnecessarily interested in these rubbish things. So why are you interested now? Then I told him the story, and he organized my trip to the village. I went to the village and met people. My first trip to that place. As an alien almost, because unfortunately, this police friend of mine arranged my trip. So there was an police inspector who accompanied me, despite my repeated request that you should not come. He said, "No, it's not a safe place, so I will have to come with you." He came in civil dress, but probably he was locally known. So people whom I talked to, they did not open up fully. They just gave me some idea, and I was very dissatisfied. I returned very dissatisfied. Next time when I went alone and I stayed there itself and started engaging with the people. I could get some idea. See, that's why I'm saying ethnographic research is a very long-term project. It's a lifetime project. Every time you go there, you discover something new. Whether you are able to enter in the inner life or not, you are not sure. Very difficult to enter in the inner life of a community. Once you enter in the inner life of the community, they start explaining things to you. Then only you can develop certain kind of perception, which could be called authentic perception. Or you could go you could get the crux of the matter through which you can explain other things. So this was my trip to that place. I'm not sure that I can say that I have written few things on that, but I'm not sure my understanding of Mayong is yet fully developed. I'm just doing very preliminary thing on that, but it will continue for next 10 years with me, I'm sure, and I hope I will be able to bring out something new. But another thing I'm doing is, and that's part of my research, that I'm trying to connect people globally who are working on this theme. I have a student, when first time I talked about Mayong with them, she was my student at that time, and she wrote a testimonial about her experience of Mayong. And now she is doing PhD in US in anthropology department. She is coordinating this group, and a lot of people are gradually getting interested in this. Recently, a Pune student group called me that they are interested in Mayong. So I think the field is not isolated. Field is not something where I visited, extracted certain things, and then wrote about it. The field is something about which we are constantly knowing. And my knowing of this field is transforming my perception of mind-body relationship. I'm interested in the mind-body debate. And my perception is conditioned by, my understanding is being conditioned by my exposure to this philosophy and the practitioners of this philosophy. The materials that I consult, or I will talk about how do I conduct, or how do we conduct research, what kind of things we are trying to call out from there. So this point I want to bring home strongly, that the relation between researcher and the field is a long-time relationship and mutually transformative relationship. And there is nothing wrong about it. The old dictum, the old wisdom that the researcher should be neutral in the field, should be isolated, I think we have abandoned that wisdom. As a researcher, we want to transform that. What kind of transformation we want to bring in? One, that we want to make the community conscious of their knowledge traditions. And the moment you ask of Mayong, people will say it is a black magic. So it's a demonized area. We would like this demonization to go away. We would like to see that how a traditional knowledge was being practiced. There could be good practice, there could be bad practice that we can differentiate. But if it is knowledge and that is in practice, we must give it due importance, and they should be aware of it. They should be able to nurture it further. If needed, combine that with the modern research so that it can be more useful for people to come. Like in case of NIAS philosophy, our next project is if we can use the NIAS technique of debate to train the students, children, in debating. We want to develop workshops and do it with the young children, because we think that in the schools, one of the reasons of growing violence is that young children have lost the technique of debating. The television debates through which people are being trained in society about debating is the worst kind of format of debate. So if we can develop that, maybe we can request the community to own it and organize workshops in the villages. That's what we are planning to, that have a research center in the village where people from outside can come and stay, and children come can come and stay and get trained in these techniques. In fact, we would like to pursue, and it's not advocacy, I don't think we are NGO doing advocacy. We would like to suggest that on the pattern of Kerala government, each state should develop its own intellectual property right document. Kerala has done that. There's a very strong Kerala School of Mathematics and Kerala School of Ayurveda. They are nurturing that system. They had made a Kerala School of Mathematics where those things are being rediscovered now. So every state should nurture its own intellectual tradition. India has many cultures simultaneously, and each culture has different kinds of knowledge traditions. If that could be mapped, that could be protected, text of those could be deciphered properly. And not only that, fragmented research would do if a combined systematic research can be done, then only the system could be revived. The knowledge system could be revived, reclaimed. And that revival is important at this moment because I think there's a deeper philosophical crisis globally. I will not go to that point, but just mention a couple of more projects, then I'll move on to what are the materials are we collecting. One of the projects, one of the fields that is part of this project is in Buxar. In Buxar, there is a mela that is being organized once in a year. This mela is very interesting. This mela, mythologically, it is said that when Ram killed Talka was. After that, he was very depressed. So he was suggested that he should go and meet the intellectuals. So 5 great rishis were staying in this field, in this area, in Buxar. And he went to them one by one. And rishis' wives, they offered him 5 kinds of food. So now this mela, we don't know since when it is being organized. We try to find out. But this mela is basically women's mela. They 5 days, this is called Panchkosi Mela. Women go from one place to other. For 5 days, this mela continues. And on each day, the same food is offered, which was offered to Ram at that time. So this is a practice that is going on, but behind the practice is also something very interesting. 5 texts in this intellectual tradition that these 5 rishis have created. We wanted to know whether people are aware of the text, where the text has any impact on the people or not, where that intellectual tradition is still preserved by some group or not, and we are finding out something very interesting. Similar is the case with Mimamsa. We went to Mandan Mishra's village. Now again, there's a 2-day conference being organized in that village every year. His texts have been translated. Maybe in JNU itself, we organized 6 days conference on one of his texts. People from different disciplines were invited to kind of talk about the text. So this is the kind of research that we call it now ethnographic research. This is the next stage of ethnographic research, where the researcher is not a neutral, isolated person. It's a lifetime work. We engage with certain fields, we work on that, and then we see how the knowledge also transforms the community. Of course, that transforms us, because knowing NIAS philosophy has transformed my understanding, my way of looking at social issues, my way of writing, my way of thinking. Similarly, knowing tantric philosophy may transform my way of thinking about sexuality, about mind-body relationship. Now, let me talk about what are the materials that we consult for this. What are the things that are available for us? I hope it makes sense, but I will stop there about the project. So we take many kinds of resources, and we are not bothered about the authenticity. Like we take stories, collect narratives, stories. It's a kind of narrative research. We collect narratives of the people, life histories of the people. We collect literature produced in the region and about the region, folklore, of course, court cases in those regions. We also collect deep interviews. We do deep interviews of people, of the practitioners, and also some of the common people. And of course, other things like songs. And then there is another field that one of my students is working on. There's a tribal knowledge system, and he's trying to see how tribals have different kind of perception of nature. So on that he's working. So he is collecting a lot of songs which are sung during cropping seasons. So we are open to any kind of material being produced by the people in the region, which are of course mediated by individual, but in a way documentation of the collective consciousness of that. And then we want to link them together to see if they are connected by the philosophy of the region. Like we started reading the text of Madhubani paintings and connecting. Normally, Madhubani painting is just a showpiece. We kind of put that in our drawing room. But if you link that with the philosophy, then you rediscover the Madhubani painting. I think this is what we are trying to do. So all kind of resources available, right from deep interview to songs, to folklores, to stories, to narratives. All these things we consider as part of our research material. Let me just end by giving one more example of how this allows you to decipher the innermost problems of philosophy, like about this person I told, Ayachi Misra. There's a very interesting story that when his son was born, his wife wanted that when he grows up, the first thing he should do, that he should go to Devghar to offer that Ganga water. And you know that this is the Kavariya kind of thing, and you have to go on foot. So he was grown up, he started that journey, he wanted to go there. But he broke his journey in between, came back home and told his father that, and remember that time there were no houses in between, it was almost vacant and very tough route. So he told his father that I was carrying water for Shiva, but I discovered a donkey was standing on the way, and the donkey was really very thirsty. So I offered water to the donkey and came back. And his father said that that donkey was a Shiva, don't worry about it. His mother got a little unhappy, but his father said that he was the god. So you can understand the kind of understanding of God that Nyaya philosophy had. This was a story given by local people. Or another story, very interesting, about the logic system. You know that Aristotelian logic is a three-stage logic, and Nyaya logic is a five-stage logic. And the story that was there in the village was that when Gautam was teaching three-stage logic to children, his wife came from kitchen, brought a mud pot and broke that pot, and smoke from the pot spread outside. And then she asked, where is the fire? Here is the smoke. And then Gautam modified his logic system, made it five-stage logic system, where you have to collect the evidences for this kind of thing. And without evidences, you can only have hypotheses. So this is what the field suggests. The interaction in the field and collection of information from the field could be of all kinds. So the ethnography now has to go to a new stage. And we are suggesting that if you want to do ethnography for social transformation, then probably what is now called autoethnography is valid. That you when you are writing ethnography, you're doing ethnography, you are part of it. You are part of the field. So you can write in the first person, and you can bring in all the emotional elements, feelings, and other things that you had during the field work in your written product. And that should be absolutely legitimate. Not that people did not have these emotional things. Earlier, it was prohibited. You don't talk about that in your writings. I think now the change has to come, that we should be allowed to read that as we have seen that, including the feelings that we had during the research. Apart from that, I think autobiographical writings should also be treated as a good resource for this. And ethno-autobiographies, particularly. Autobiographies not only indicating about one personal life, but autobiographies which covers the relationship between self and society. Those kind of autobiographies should be treated as a product of ethnographic research. That's my point. The normal language of social science is not only boring, but also not able to communicate things for transformation. I think autoethnographic kind of writings, where, I mean, let me give an example and finish that my lecture with that. Tulsi Ram, professor from JNU, wrote this autobiography Murdaiya, where he has explained, and he's a Dalit, he was a Dalit, so he has just written about his life in the village. And Murdaiya is a place where body is burned, the Shamsan. And he used to go there and play there as a Dalit child. So he explains the village, explains his life in the village. Of course, he's always there, embedded in that life, but he's talking about the life of the village, very much like Farnishwanath Renu's Mela Achal. Renuji is there, of course, always there, but it's a novel. So it's a novel and autobiography in between. Mela Achal's protagonists are live people. They were live people. They were actually existing in the world. And Renuji has written about that a lot. Similarly, this autobiography of Tulsi Ram was a life world. It's there. He was very much part of that, embedded in that. That kind of text should be now considered as a legitimate research writing. In fact, that should be promoted. Why? For instance, I took this book, and that's what I wanted to say. I took this book and gave it to an old lady to read. She was around 75, 78 years old, upper caste lady. She read that autobiography and started crying. She said, I never realized that my behavior used to humiliate Dalits like anything. Now, rest of my life, I'd want to kind of do some paschatap. This is the impact of the text. So research should have impact on the people. I think that makes that book great. If the text has really a transformative potential, if the text has transformed people. I can give many examples of this kind. But central point I want to bring home is that transformative social science will have to adopt new kinds of method and new kinds of writing styles, which could be autoethnography kind of thing. I will stop here. If there are questions, I will try. I hope I have not taken too much of time.
Absolutely not, Manindraji. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for one of the most extraordinary lectures I have ever listened to. I'm speechless. I'm personally hoping that you could go on for a little while longer, but I think there are some questions already, and I see a hand up. So Kanchan, please go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you for this wonderful talk. I really enjoyed it. So first question I wanted to ask that definitely, as you are saying that it's a thing of the past that researcher cannot be neutral anymore. But in ethnographic research, what I can see happening that there could be no, it is very difficult to find a researcher with no agenda at all. Because we can see most of the times it happens either there are political interests, there are vested interests, either from the side of the researchers or they can be from the side of the politics. So how do you think that we can avoid this bias? Where researcher can have an opinion that we are not denying, but how can we avoid the vested interest, which is very much possible factor for ethnographic research?
Should I question one by one, or should I take some questions and answer? What do you want?
Whichever you would prefer. So I see a couple of more questions. Maybe would you like me to read them out to you?
You can do that also.
Okay. Okay.
I had one more question, just possibility of ethnographic research to become more and more interdisciplinary, so that you have I'm from the literature background and also from the journalism background, and I could associate both of my backgrounds with ethnographic research very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Kanchan. I see a very interesting question by Ms. Vishakha Sen as well. Would you like to ask the question, Ms. Vishakha? If you would, then I could definitely unmute you.
Yes. Good evening, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Good evening, ma'am. Am I audible?
Make yourself visible also. It will be
Okay.
give me good
I'll
feeling.
try, sir. I'll
Okay.
try.
No, if it's difficult, please give up. Give up. Otherwise, it's fine, Vishaka. If you are
Yes,
not,
sir.
yeah.
Good evening, sir. Am I
Yes,
audible?
yes, yes.
Thank you, Pushya, ma'am, for arranging this lecture today. It was very insightful for us. So my question that I wrote was that there is a Jarwa tribe that lives in Port Blair, Andaman Islands, and the tourists are taken, arranged in buses and cars to pass through the forest where they live, which is their natural habitat. I just wanted to ask, though it has become a source of income, is it necessary? Is it so necessary for us to disturb their environment? Because of course we can always visit a museum and study about them, know about their culture through the details that are exhibited there. So I just wanted to ask, is it legitimate? Because they are a very close tribe, and I came across Dr. Naidu, who had done participatory research with them back in 1960s, and it took 6 months to 1 year for him to reach out to them and help them and live with them and experience how they do their daily activities and everything. So I just wanted to know that, so as a researcher, what do you feel that ethnographic, of course, it has to reach out to the society, but how should society respond? I mean, I did not go to Baratang for this very reason. We avoided it. So what do you feel about it? Thank you, sir.
So would you like to maybe take...
Yes, sure. You want me to respond now?
Sure, sir. And then we'll take the next set of questions.
Thank you very much. Kanchan, I think it is entirely possible that we go for research with a vested agenda. My only request will be to, or only ethical compulsions would be to express that agenda clearly, so that people know that you are going with this agenda and people can evaluate your research. The tragedy is that we don't express our hidden agenda, and we don't explain why and how are we doing that, what are our biases, and we have a claim of authenticity. That is where the problem arises. One, that I think this epistemic arrogance of calling authenticity should be given away. That's the first thing. We can't be bias free. We all have biases. We go there with certain kind of biases, no doubt about it. At best, what we should do is we should make our biases very transparent. As a researcher, that's the ethics that we should follow. The other thing is, yes, ethnography is interdisciplinary. In fact, I myself is very indisciplined person, so I have no discipline, in the sense that I'm not kind of you could easily see that I'm not very much connected. I'm teaching political science, but I'm always breaking the boundaries. So the breaking these boundaries is very, very, very important. It's very, very important. Literature particularly, I mean, I wish to introduce a course in JNU, literature and politics. Without knowing, this is my statement in the first class of my MA, that if you don't read literature and don't watch film, please do not attend my classes. You are doing social science, which is something else, not social science. So absolutely, and literature particularly, you know what happens. My argument is that I wrote recently an article on decline of Republican democracy and rise of authoritarian state, analysis of 3 novels in Hindi. Something that social science catches very late, literature may catch very early. This is one thing. Second thing, that literature can represent the community in its totality. Read Renu's novels if you want to understand that reason, the person from the reason. That novel, those novels can help you a lot, much more than any social science text. So I think this interdisciplinarity is extremely important. I just read a paper yesterday on the inner world of Indian society, reading Renu's Mela Achal. And I argued about the understanding of sexuality in Indian society, which I think is very different than the morality that we got from the British hegemonic ideology. So this is extremely important. Thank you, Kanchan, for these 2 questions. Vishaka, you know, I also went to that place called, what is that area? Port Blair. And I was so upset by this fact that when the cars used to cross that region, this tribe would come on the road and people were warned that they will be coming. And it's a kind of joke I found. So I started working on it, on the Jarawa tribe. And I met another doctor. I couldn't meet him physically, but I had a long discussion and I'm in touch with him. I bought all his books and they are part of my library now, who has worked for 20, 30 years with this tribe. And he is suggesting that, you know, they have a very different kind of knowledge system about the nature. Of course, that may not be sufficient for handling everything, but the language that they use, and that's very advanced language in a way, in some senses. For instance, for certain things, there are more words in that language than English or Hindi language. So treating any human group or community as an archival museum piece is simply a crime. I think they should naturally be allowed to live the way they are. And if they want to transform, that should be their choice to transform. It's not the civilizational mission of so-called the mainstream that we are trying to do. In fact, this tribal student of mine who is working in Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh, you must speak to him. He will tell you how those people reproduce their own environment. They don't consume mindlessly. Very interesting ethos, very interesting philosophy, very interesting knowledge systems that they nurture. There is an anthropologist professor from Ranchi, when I was speaking on tribal knowledge system in Ranchi, he told me that his father gives a medicine for normal delivery. And his wife was undergoing that process. Doctor was saying there was cesarean, but this boy insisted that his father should give the medicine, and his father gave the medicine. It was normal delivery. But when this boy wants this medicine, he told his father that, let me know about it. Father said, you are not eligible for it. You will start marketing this. Therefore, I will not give it to you. So there's a knowledge system. There's a ethos of the knowledge system. You must have read that Premchand's famous story, Mantra, or you go on the YouTube and type Mantra, you will get the story. There is an ethos of those knowledge systems. There are internal logic of the knowledge system. I think that we should try to decipher instead of really kind of going on the civilizational mission. As a researcher, we should not unnecessarily take that topic to research unless we are deeply interested in being with them and learning from them. Yes, any other question? Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, there's I see a couple of hands up. Yeah, Sanjana, could you please ask your question?
Hello, sir. Thank you for your lecture. I agree with a lot of the ways that you're trying to view ethnography. So I have two questions. So my first question is, do you think that if we have kind of seen how the researcher self is already present in all kinds of ethnographic research, is the term autoethnography kind of redundant because the self is already present in all forms of ethnographic writing? So using that, is the distinction useful, and how do we kind of make why the distinction if the self is already present in all forms of ethnography? And my second kind of question is, a lot of the concepts that you mentioned, like being, thinking, knowing, experience, are all also, we know that they're all kind of concepts that are drawn upon in like philosophical discussions and in the discipline of philosophy generally. What are your views on kind of on the subfield of like philosophical anthropology, and do you see in your view, do you think there's a need for the two disciplines to connect to overcome the same kind of crisis that you mentioned, of the crisis in the social sciences? And do you think kind of bridging the gap between those two disciplines, or kind of investing in the sub-discipline more seriously, will help us overcome the same crisis that you spoke about? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah, I see Dr. Mahesh's hand up as well. Thank you, Sanjana. And yeah, please go ahead, Dr. Mahesh.
Thank you, Professor. I just have one question which I struggle with nowadays, because as we are going in the modern education, we are separated from emotion, and we are more taught to be a rational beings rather than emotional and social beings. And so that most of the time that separates us from the field. And what I live in London now, and I teach at Public Health Institute, and most of the students who come from, they're far away from the field of and these connection of being in the field is quite difficult to get it. So how do we deal with these issues which we are facing?
Should I answer these two first and then?
Sure, sir.
Sanjana, I think you have raised a very important question. And the first one is not so difficult to answer. That is, why I'm saying it autoethnography, because yes, the researcher was always present in the ethnography, but never accepted. There was a kind of wisdom, or you may say unsaid rule, that you have to sound very neutral. So in your writings, you have to kind of always write in third person. Even if you are making certain points which are very subjective, you have to sound very objective. That the preoccupation of being objective, I think that has to go away, and therefore you need a new term to emphasize on that point. I remember my professor, when he wrote her book in 1980, Her book was returned by Oxford saying that she has used first person in her book. And she was very adamant that she would write the book in the first person. Finally, it was accepted. So now it is no more question, I know. The people have accepted that. But when it comes to research, your PhDs and the research projects, there still that norm is kind of there, that you have to be very objective and what is the basis of your knowledge, what are the evidences that you are giving. You cannot give the evidence. I always call it like seeing is knowing, or feeling is knowing. So seeing is knowing is so powerful that feeling is knowing is always marginalized, right? But I think feeling can also be a source of knowing, and very powerful source of knowing. Maybe we don't have evidence at the moment to suggest, but my feeling should be acknowledged in my writing, and I should be proud of saying that I'm feeling so. This is my feeling at the moment, or the emotions that I want to express in my writing should be acceptable as legitimate writing in social sciences. But the second thing, that's concepts, and that I'm drawing from philosophy, or as I said, that this boundary in knowledge, this is very modern and artificial. This is not sustainable. This is just not sustainable. We have to, this is a Humpty Dumpty kind of situation. They fell down and they kind of broke down and then could not be put together again. So I think we have to now discover how do we become more in discipline. How do we get out from our disciplinary boundaries? And this is not easy to happen. You know, in JNU, this was first conceptualized that there will not be departments, there will be schools. And in schools, there will be different disciplines. The idea was that all of them will at least interact among themselves. Not even social science people interact among themselves. It is called a School of Social Sciences, but they are separate, being in the same building, but they are separate disciplines. There's no interaction. So not very easy to bring them together to interact. I think we have moved from discipline-oriented research to phenomenon-oriented research. And in phenomenon-oriented research, from wherever you get certain resources to explain, you must kind of get that. Like for reading Renu, I'm using Sudhir Kakkar's book, Intimate Relations. So it's so useful. I asked him, he has mentioned Renu in his introduction, but then I asked him that if you have any plan to write on Renu from this perspective. He said, no, I don't have any plan to write. So I said, okay, let me use your method to read Renu further. So there is no limit to what we should draw from where. Whatever can help us in understanding the reality, and that too for transforming it, we must use that. So just open up, and we must, as particularly as anthropologists, or if you're doing the ethnography in political science also, even in election studies, now there's a big debate that whether we should have the survey research or ethnographic research. And there are people who are suggesting that ethnographic research gives us better understanding of the politics. It may not tell us that who will win, who will lose, but it tells us that how the politics is being conducted, which is the purpose of knowing, right? Who will win, what is the big news, what is the bad news, what is the good news, is a television's game. But as researchers, we have to find out the internal dynamics and the generative mechanics of the events. What is there that can be deciphered? That's our process. So there, I think we must break all the boundaries of the disciplines. Dr. Mahesh, I think this debate about emotion, even in the West, now people are debating about it. I think Martha Nussbaum has written a very nice book on emotion. And I think now we must settle down on this idea that we are rational and emotional beings simultaneously. We are both together. And particularly in social science, when we are working on the social issues, we can't keep our emotions away. Just not possible to keep our emotions away. It would be better to factor in the emotion when we are doing the research and think about things emotionally also if needed. Because maybe when you think about things emotionally, or you understand social issues emotionally also, certain other kinds of dimensions of reality would decipher themselves before us. Like when Gopal Guru says that there is an experiential epistemology, that experience allows you to see things which otherwise you can't see. I think there is a possibility. I'm not saying that experience is the only method through which you can see something, or emotion is the only thing through which you can understand the relationship. But I think emotion allows you to decipher the sections of reality, parts of reality, which otherwise you can't. So this overemphasis on being emotionless when you are working in the field should be done away with. I think this is also true about medical science now. Munna Bhai MBBS is a good example, where you are treating body as a machine, and you thought that you know how to oil the machine to run, but then you forgot that there's something very, very esoteric called emotion that may make the machine better. And if you have watched Munna Bhai MBBS, I'm sure that you can connect with that idea that how emotion plays very important role in our life. And interestingly, when I was hospitalized during the COVID, I realized that the hospital in which I was there, the staff was very much trained in emotionally helping the patients. I talked to the doctor. He said that, look, we had a training program. We told them, look, this is a very difficult situation. Patients are not only suffering, entire family is suffering. They are totally unsettled. Maybe people have lost their job and they're falling sick. They don't have money. So many problems are there. And then they are alone. Their family members cannot visit, and you are not visible because you are in the PPE kit. So you have to be extra careful about emotions. So probably emotion is something that is so human, and it should not be given up even for doing research, good research. I know there are challenges that when doctor is emotionally involved with the patient, then normally the doctors are told that don't get emotionally involved with the patient, because it has impact on you, and that impact will create problem for you next few patients. So you should not do that. But I think when the doctors are emotional, they become good doctors also. Similarly, a social scientist, if we are emotional, we will become better social scientists tomorrow.
Thank you so much, sir. There are two last questions. May I ask them, or
Please carry on.
Sir, there's one question from Kanchan who asks, how do you think the new education policy will promote interdisciplinary research of an ethnographic nature? And Maya Dodd, who's also, I think, shared some very interesting links as you were talking about Mayang and other things as well. She asks, also wondering how the location of ideas can be challenged by the flow of ideas that travel far beyond the point of origin, giving the example of Buddhism. These are the two questions.
Okay. Thank you, Kanchan. I think new education policy, though I must acknowledge that I have not read it threadbare, but I don't think the policymakers have these ideas as yet. Policymakers don't take social science so seriously. That is one of the problems. And therefore, the required investment for interdisciplinary research, that they are not ready to do. Investment both in terms of institution making or institution building and in terms of project funding. They are not very much interested in that. So they, particularly the present regime, thinks that social science is something that is not needed, that is unnecessary. So I'm not sure. I'm yet to see what are the implications of, or what is the perception that they have about this kind of social science. Please share the links that she has shared with me, if you can. And location of ideas and flow of ideas is very interesting question. I think at the location of ideas, you find ideas being present in people's everyday life, in the language that they are using in their everyday life. When ideas transmigrate from one place to other, that is what is lost. The text may be transported. Idea through the text, generally ideas are transported. Through the text only ideas are transported. But the life world is missing. And therefore we thought that we want to get to the life world of a philosophical reason. I give you an example. That somebody, this is very famous, Vada, Vivad and Vitanda, the concept of debating. And this is what we got in the Mithila reason. Everybody would talk about it. Or in their marriages, you will find, if somebody knows about the Mithila marriage, what happens there when the Bharat comes home, the boy goes inside for marriage, and the Bharat and Sarat, the girl party and the boy party, both sit in there, and there is a debate. I was doing my field work. I got a chance to participate in such a marriage. So the Bharat party told me, the Sarat party told me that, why don't you ask some questions? So I asked them that Buddhism and Nyaya both seem to be similar philosophies. Both are very logically powerful traditions. Both don't believe in existence of God, more or less. They don't believe in that much existence of God. Yet, why did they fight? I mean, if you go to Mithila, this is very commonsensical story. You will find that one of the professors told us, who was located there, that the Naiyayiks chased the Buddhists out. And why this happened? I asked them why this happened. Why such a big fight took place? There are many public debates that is existing in their collective consciousness there. And there's a very interesting book by R.K. Chaudhary on Vikramshila University, which documents the public debates between Buddhists and the Naiyayiks in that area. So I asked this question. The other party could not answer that. They tried hard. One said that one is vegetarian, one is non-vegetarian, and so many differences they talked about, but nobody could bring out that. And then there was an internal discussion between the Bharat party. They were saying that, well, I was telling you, why don't you take that person along with us in the Bharat? He could have answered this question. So there are people who are hired during the Bharat who have capacity to answer such complicated questions. Like there are people who have capacity to eat so much, they're also hired. But these people who can argue so much, they're also hired, or they can answer such questions. So this is a tradition which is living tradition there. So if you go to the other area where this tradition is very well being taught in the university system, you may not get this kind of experiences that you get in the everyday life. And my assertion is that this everyday life of the practice of the knowledge also allows us to understand the dynamics of the knowledge itself, or internal logic of the knowledge itself. It's like the rus of the knowledge that you can get there, which is missing when the knowledge is transported somewhere. That's what I think.
Thank you so much, sir. I think, yeah, a lot of people have been, there are a lot of comments in the chat box. I know we have taken a lot of your time, and before we conclude, with your permission, I'd request Dr. Saurabh, who we have to thank for inviting you and for giving us the opportunity of listening to you. I request Dr. Saurabh to please say a few words before we conclude.
Thank you, Dr. Pusha, and thanks a lot, sir, for this wonderful lecture. And I have been listening, sir, since my MPhil days and attended his classes, many lectures. And I have always found sir's classes he's always grappling with the fresh ideas, new kind of the researches. And even in JNU, he like moves in the so many centers, Sanskrit Center, Political Science, of course, he's there, and Philosophy, Sociology Center, and through his Forum for Creative Social Theory, he's nurturing a whole generation who will like engage in this new kind of the ethnographic research. And today's lecture was fascinating, and as you have like brilliantly pointed out the notion of auto ethnography, that how the ethnographer is first of all the being in the word, and he encounters himself in the word, and cannot have the kind of the God's eye point of view or the Archimedean point of view on the field. And that was and equally interesting was the relationship between the self and the field, that how the field shapes, not only shapes but also transforms us. And equally interesting was how in the Mayong this tantra, this philosophical aspects of the tantra reshapes our understandings of the relationship between the mind body dualism. So my query actually is regarding this question, because in NIAS we are also exploring on Kashmiri Shaivism, especially with the idea of the self in the Consciousness Study Center. Uh, in Vigyan Bhairav Tantra, especially, have found that there are many kind of the meditation techniques which are
Only
quite
one,
different from the
126 techniques. Yeah.
yeah. So they are quite different from the Advaita or other kind of the meditation technique, which is more like reflective in the nature. But what is interesting in this technique, I have found that there is the affirmation of the word, of the power of the material, power of the things outside. That if you see a friend and after a long time and joy well up in your heart, be aware of that joy. Or like some another meditation technique, that if you are eating some sweet thing and you likes, you melt your mind in that joy. So what I find interesting, this Kashmiri Shaivism's equal emphasis on the Prakriti, which is not, while Prakriti is just an appendage in Sankhya or in the Advaita, where it has to be overcome. Here, why you remain in the word and get yourself transformed through these material possibilities. So I was just curious that how do you understand this relationship in Tantra?
I think Tantra, I don't know much about Kashmiri Shaivism. Vigyan Bhairav, I have tried to
Yeah.
study, but I can't claim that I know very well. But it's very powerful text, reflective text, probably one of the most powerful texts that this civilization has produced. But I can tell you in Tantra, and particularly what I got while talking to some of the people from Mayang, that they treat this body as very important. We can't go into the layers of consciousness without being conscious of the body. In your body is the means through which we reach there. And it's very interesting. You can find good example of this in Sudhir Kakkar's novel Ecstasy, where he is talking about Ramakrishna Paramahansa, the way he was treating his body to transform, to reach to the consciousness. So body and mind, they treat as together. And therefore the Tantra, I'm also not an expert on Tantra. I don't think I'm only knowing Tantra via Mayang. That's my route to know, entering to the knowledge tradition, and read some text, of course, but not a master of that. So, but I think what I get from there is that the body and mind is like the finest form of body is the mind, and crudest form of mind is the body. They are not two separate things. And therefore, you are always between the finest form of something and the crudest form of something. You kind of traveling in between. So even if you want to go to the highest layer of your consciousness, you have to pass through the body. That is what, and then they say that the evidence that you have reached to the highest level of consciousness is that you can transform the body, influence the body. In fact, if we treat Tantra as a healing tradition, as the Mayong people now call themselves, earlier they were called the place of black magic. Now they are claiming that this is a place for white magic. So I asked them, what is this white magic? They said the white magic is a healing tradition. Okay. We never believed in black magic. Actually, we believed in healing. So I said, well, how do you heal? What is your, do you give medicines? He said, no, it is not medicine. We heal through consciousness. So they believe that consciousness is so powerful that it can transform the physical things. Maybe these are the myths that they transform human beings into animals or animals into human beings, or they would spellbound the tiger becomes a kind of friend. These could be myths, mythological things also. But I could say that, you know, these are the mythology stories there, that there used to be people who used to transform human being into animals. बकरा बना देते थे, टाइगर को साथ में लेके चलते थे. But I guess what symbolically that represents is that the consciousness can transform the material world, and we can reach to the consciousness via material world, through material world. But they are not two separate things. They are one. One, like water and ice, same but in two different stages of existence, two different forms of existence. So is the mind and body. That's their perception. That's how they, I think that's a wonderful argument. And if I can go back to some of the, Varun probably is around or he has left. So Varun and I keep debating about panpsychism and all. So I think this is a good intervention in mind-body debate, where one can see, and they give the evidence. That's the best thing of it, the first part of it. They can transform that, they can demonstrate that also. Not that I have seen that demonstration, but I believe that if you become closer to them and they open up to you, then they can show you certain experimental part of that. They don't show it to us very easily, and I'm not lucky enough to get that. But as I said, my home is located in between Gorakhpur to Kamakhya, and that used to be the route of one of my students who has worked on Gorakhpur, has traveled on that route, and he told me the stories. And then I remember that a lot of sadhus used to come and stay at my place, and I have witnessed some of them demonstrating certain amazing things. And even if I was a child, I think I was grown up enough to see whether it was a kind of magic or something. But I think they were capable of demonstrating. They sadhana जिसको कहते हैं ना, they mastered the body to some extent that they could use the consciousness. That's how they did. So I think that's Kashmiri Saivaism may be closer to this, because Kashmir also has a strong tradition of this kind. I'm yet to really get into it. Maybe in future I'll try.
Yeah, just a short follow-up of this, that in Uttarakhand also we have like this Jaunsari community near this Mussoorie and Yamunotri area. So there is also like in the popular imagination, there is a mystery shrouded against them, especially around the woman of there, that they transform if the male goes there. No longer right now, but in the folklore and all that. So I interpreted it as like, especially in these areas, there is a more nature worship, more relationship with the nature and the power of feminine. So whenever these organized religions or this structured society comes into contact of that, so it creates a like a kind of otherness to that, or like a, because this is the alterity or a kind of a awe. So that is why these kind of the myths are generated there. So how do you like?
I'm not sure of it. You know, now I have started thinking of something else. Have you seen some of the videos of Michio Kaku? Michio Kaku is a physicist.
Okay.
And he talks, he's very popular because he is trying to popularize science and is like Feynman, who has capacity to deliver things in a very simple language.
Okay.
So he's a very fashionable physicist. So I was teaching Quran to my students once. I was comparing three texts, Quran, Gita, and Bible. And one of the students asked me that, what is this idea of zinat in Quran? You think these are the myths and all? And I started looking for resources, what kind of explanations are available. And Kaku gives a very interesting explanation to such things which are generally available in tantric discourses, or the discourse that you said. He says that science is arguing now that we are not living in universe. We are living in pluriverse. There are many universes around, and there could be a universe which is hovering upon us. It's entirely, he says that the magnetic field exploration has suggested that where we are sitting and not seeing anything around, but there is another life, or there is another kind of being that is existing. So there is a 4-dimensional, 5-dimensional, 11-dimensional things. Like if you put your hand inside the fish aquarium, a fish will never know that who are you, and your full dimensions can't be comprehended. Similarly, maybe some other dimension things are there which we can't comprehend.
Right.
And there are moments when we somehow see some face, like our hand going to the aquarium. Normally we don't do it. So sometimes some part is visible and we get kind of wonderstruck that what is it, and then explanations. I'm not sure if it is correct or not, but I trust him. It is a Shabda Praman for me. I trust him because he is a scientist. But interestingly, this is what was told to me by a tantric in Mayon. When I asked him, what is this? What are you? What is tantric practices? He told me very interesting. He said, look, you can see certain things by your eyes. For certain things, you need lenses. For certain things, you need microscope. But yet there are things which you can't see. Human beings have not developed instruments enough to see those micro things. But human mind has a capacity to meditate through meditation and through getting into layers of consciousness. They can see many more things, which I can understand. I mean, it's possible that in different layers of consciousness, we can have different kinds of things visible to us. So he says that there are other species existing in the universe, which don't interact with us, we don't interface with them. But through these meditations, that's a sadhana that we try to engage with those species. And they can do amazing things for us. Now, if it is a kind of thing where two universes are meeting, and therefore certain things happen which we can't think it is possible, but it could become possible because of that. I'm not sure, but this is the explanation that he gave. And I want to keep it open. I don't want to close it. I'm a Marxist basically, but I don't want to be so orthodox suggesting that, well, these things should be rejected immediately as myths and useless things. I think we have to keep these things. I respect human experiences. And I want to keep that open for knowledge creation.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
An incredible answer. So, thank you. I see one last, I see Varun has his hand up, sir. Would you want to take that question?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, Varun, I've unmuted you.
Show your face also, Varun. I've not seen you since long. Good. Unmute yourself, Varun.
Sure. Sorry. Thanks a lot for this lecture, sir. I really enjoyed it, and we have always discussed these
I hope
issues.
I didn't let you down.
No, sir. I just wanted to add something, if it's possible, like if I can add something. I mean, what you told about Michio Kaku, it's very interesting. Michio Kaku has also explained this phenomena of pluriverse and multiverse, which is now sort of an orthodox position within physicists, the larger quantum physicist circles. And even those so-called psychological phenomena, for instance, deja vu, Deja vu is very common. We all experience that. Michio Kaku has also explained deja vu in terms of the conception of multiverse, that maybe there is something which is beyond psychology working there. So when we see that, oh, we have already experienced this stuff, we have already been through this place, or we have already visited this place. So this could be possible that, because there are infinite number of universe, and this demarcation that exists between quantum and physical, the macro and micro, is so fuzzy. Quantum physicists are still debating it. This is called quantum decoherence problem. So maybe there is this possibility that even normal psychological phenomena that we take for granted that can be explained psychologically, have some aspects of it which I don't want to call it parapsychology because it has a different connotation, but which is natural. So our conception of what is natural and supernatural has to be redefined. And so many philosophers, even political thinkers like John Gray, and recently Ronald Dawkins have written a work on religion without God, where he's acknowledging that these conceptions of spirituality and these concepts are very human. I mean, he's saying that we need to take religion out of the conception of God. We are obsessed with the idea of God, but we are missing something very natural, which are part of our basic instinct. And secondly, this conception of, as Dr. Saurabh has discussed, this Kashmir Shaivism. Kashmir Shaivism, if I'm not wrong, Chakravarti Ramprasad has worked on Kashmir Shaivism, and he has tried to understand Kashmir Shaivism is very affirmatively arguing that sub-tradition of Kashmir Shaivism, which is Pratyabhijna philosophy, is panpsychist in nature. So Kashmir Shaivism is fundamentally panpsychist, where matter and mind and body, there's no duality between mind and body, and matter entails a certain notion of sentience to it. So these were the two interventions that I wanted to make, and thank you so much for it.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Thank you, Varun. And Chakravarti Ramprasad, I was talking to, I wanted him to deliver some lectures on this Kashmir Shaivism actually. Yeah. Maybe it could be organized sometime.
Yeah, his new books, this Human Being, Bodily Being, this he is working on, he told, I think recently I'm reading this book 2 years back. So he's working on some project called ecological phenomenology, in which he is basically analyzing Charak Samhita and Nal Damayanti episode. That
are you in touch with him?
No, I think I'm reading this because he recently wrote this book on Human Being, Bodily Being. So, but I am reading his works mostly. I hope you invite sometime, then we can.
Sure, I got in touch with him long back. Recently, I have not been able to talk to him.
Yeah,
but I read his book on knowledge, power and knowledge, something. Right. Very interesting text. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Well, yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Varun.
Yeah, if there is nothing else. So Manindra ji, thank you so much. It is an enormous honor and privilege to have listened to you. And I hope to have the honor several more times of listening to you and also widening my horizon of thought and experience. So thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you so much for gracing us with this lecture. I really wish we had more time, and I could keep listening to you as long as you were.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So thank you so much, sir.
Thanks for kind words. Thank you very much. I hope it makes sense. That's it.
Absolutely. I also thank Dr. Saurabh for inviting Dr. Manindra Thakur and giving us the opportunity of listening to him. I'd like to thank our Dean and Head of the Consciousness Studies Program, Professor Sangeeta Menon, for facilitating and conceptualizing this course. I'd like to particularly thank my colleagues, Abhishek and Ashwini, for the enormous amount of background work that they have done to make this possible with the Zoom platform, coordinating the mails and everything. Thank you so much. And last but not, and also my other NIAS colleagues who have also been there with their support and enthusiasm. And I'd also like to thank all the participants for being here, for engaging so beautifully. And we look forward very much to seeing you in the upcoming lectures. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.